Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another lecture on ecosystem and biodiversities. Friends, in the last lecture we had seen a major concept about abiotic component, and today with continuation of this criteria we are going to see forward something important related to biotic component. So in the last lecture, what we had an idea about abiotic component was related to understand its structure and characteristic feature. Like we have seen something about the climatic factor, adiabatic factor, inorganic factors and organic factors. On the basis of the same criteria, now today we are going to connect this abiotic factors to our biotic factors, that is living systems or living organism, to understand its function and how this living system, that is a biotic component, works and functions in an ecosystem. That means how they are interconnected with each other and how they are interconnected with the biotic functions. Let's start with the very first idea of understanding the biotic function. So, in last lecture also we have just made a quick revision about the biotic component and understanding the biotic ideas. Today, with this same function, we are going to look forward for the actual idea of how the working of this biotic components, that plant, animal and organism is there in an ecosystem. So biotic component means something which is a living part in the ecosystem or an environment, and this ecosystem and environment has a number of biotic component. This can be macro in nature, micro in nature, or that of the visible and non-visible cellular structures also. For example, microbes is one of the invisible. Bed eye से आप देख नहीं सकते हो microbes, so that is one of the very difficult part of biotic component. This living organism, that is biotic functions or biotic components in an ecosystem, has a number of bacteria and fungi also, and they have a major role because the idea of understanding the role of biotic takes place because of these microorganisms, majorly bacteria and fungi. They have the ability which is similar to that of the plant, that is capturing of the nutrient and component material which is required for that of the organism, living organism or living body. Now this can be something related to direct interaction, or this can also be something related to indirect interactions also. This functioning of the biotic components is basically divided based on the type of the food material or type of the living or type of the system in which they are living. Okay. For example, let us make it very simple, that they are divided as producers, consumers and decomposers. So decomposers are basically also called as the reducers. Also, one should always keep in mind that when we are studying something about the producers, consumers and decomposers, we are talking something about the living organism and the basic idea or food material in which they survive. So, the idea of understanding the producers, consumers and decomposers will make and help us to understand the very further process which are something related to the cycles and the pyramids of ecosystem. Let's understand one by one the idea components of the biotic system. We'll go with the very first part, and the very first part is called as the producers. So right now you might have been very clear with the idea that plants are basically called as the producers. The idea or the reference is very simple, that they are having the ability to transform the material. That means they have the ability to capture the carbon dioxide, release out the oxygen. This is the very first criteria. But the second important criteria is that they are one of the living organism which capture the carbon dioxide, and with the help of the sunlight and water material, it produces one of the important factor for the living organisms, especially the animals and the human beings, that is called as the sugar material. This of course sugar material is not in a form of a direct sugar, but rather it is in a form of a carbohydrate material, sometimes in a form of a nutrient and proteins also. So it becomes important that producer is one kind of living organism, that is, they may be a plant, algae or photosynthetic bacteria. In short, the animals or the organisms which have a chlorophyll content, that is green part content, and which can manufacture their own food. So producers have the capability of producing their own food. That means they generate their own food, maybe by division process, maybe by combination process. They can take it in direct form, or they can just convert it into and some another form of protein and carbohydrate material, sugar material, so it becomes absorbable material. And henceforth, this is one of the major reason why the producers are also called as autotrophs. That means they are self-feeder. So autotrophs means, auto itself means self and trophos means a feeder. That means they can prepare their own food and they can prepare own food by consuming own food also. Now one thing is important, that whatever the food material is being produced by these producers, this can be a number of producers in an ecosystem, so we know that it is very wide in number. So there is actually no such right now a number which can decide that this number of producer is present in an ecosystem. But maximally you can just keep in mind or just can remember that they are something which can produce their own food. For example, plants. Let's go with the basic idea of plants. So these plants have a major role in one of the system of biotic activity, and it is something related to understanding the part of the nutrients. That means they have the idea of incorporating and maintaining the nutrient cycle. Henceforth, they are one of the important components. They are interface in a sense that they are one of the major important factor or the starting factor of a cycle which is called as a food chain or a food web. They are one of the they are having the chemical property, and hence because of this chemical property they have dual nature. That means whatever the food is being produced by the producer, they survive on that material, and henceforth they also pass on this chemical property or chemical material such as carbohydrates, proteins and nutrients to another organism on which these organisms can survive. That means, for example, whatever the material is being taken in by the plant is partially passed away to other organism and partially taken away for the self development and self growth and survival. Now this food material which is being passed on for the other organism, the animals feed on this which is in a stored form. Now this stored form again is in a form of a carbohydrate which when consumed by the organism, another organism, let's take insects or maybe animals who feed on the plants, they will take this carbohydrate and make it into a complex form. Now with the producers, let's try and understand another important chain with related to that of the biotic component, and which is one of the second important or maybe we can say equally important component of the food chain or food web, and that is something related to consumers. So consumers are something which get their energy when they consume the plants. Okay, so you can, like I've said just now, so it can be something related to the organisms which are maybe feeding on the plants like goat, cow, deer, rabbit, or maybe they can be some other kind of organisms which feed on another organism, that will be called as a carnivorous part. So for example, tiger, lion, wolf, etc. On this basis, consumer, that means on the basis of eating habitat and living habitat, they are being further divided as herbivorous, carnivorous and omnivorous. So herbivorous are something, or herbivorous consumers, so something called as the prime consumers. Reason is because they are something which they feed basically on the plant system. So when we talk something about the consumers, it is important that food chain should always be maintained. Reason is because nutrients are being transferred and then they can be mapped. So they are not transferred. That means nutrients do not jump from one level to another level. Rather, they are transferred step by step. So when the plants produce the energy, it is having a maximum weight or mass. That means energy का mass बहुत ज़्यादा होता है लोअर लेवल में, जहाँ पे प्रोड्यूस करता है एनर्जी को. दैट मीन्स सन को कैप्चर करके, सनलाइट को कैप्चर करके विद द हेल्प ऑफ वाटर एंड कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड एनर्जी प्रोड्यूस किया जाता है. इसीलिए वहां पे बेस में बहुत ज्यादा अमाउंट ऑफ एनर्जी, दैट मीन्स वेट एंड मास होता है. On the other hand, when it is being transferred, like we said, producers will take the partial energy and pass the partial energy. So whatever the food material is being transferred from the plants to the herbivorous, of course they will pass the energy, but this energy will be in an reduced pattern. Now this producers will pass the energy and this will be transferred and this will be mapped, and this will be mapped in the product or the formula called as food chain or food web. We will look at this part in our coming lectures. Let's just try and understand today the idea about consumers, so it becomes easy for us to understand something about the diversities and the food chain, food web. Now these consumers basically harvest only 10% of energy. Like I've said that the energy is passed from one level to from the lower level to higher level. So it is not transferred as it is. Of course, when you pass on the energy, it will be transferred with the degradation or with the decrease. So only 10% of energy is whatever energy is passed on, the energy is only consumed it up to 10%. So biomass, of course, you can see when the food chain is following itself, when the food web is following itself and you are getting the amount of food, it will be in the reduced form. Till you reach the highest level, the energy level will be almost in a negligible form. On this basis of division of consumption of energy, we basically divide it as primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers and quaternary consumers. Now keep in mind, even though we are calling it as primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary, they are basically divided as, or they are basically as herbivorous, or maybe they will be called as primary consumers or second order consumers, third order consumers for tertiary consumers, and quaternary consumers, that will be called as a fourth order consumer, or also you can say that they will be called as omnivorous organisms. Okay, so it is compulsory, you should mind that consumers are having basic 4 criteria only. It is nothing with relation to that of decomposers. It is basically something with regard to organism which you can see by your eyes and which depend on one another for their food products. Let's understand something about the primary consumers. So through the picture, it will become easy for you people to understand what is the idea of primary consumers. The primary consumers, as I said, is also called as the first order consumer, or also will be called as an herbivorous. So you should keep in mind this concept because this is the very frequent question which is being asked in the examination, and we people rarely get a correct answer for it. Reason is because when we talk something about consumers, there is an idea of first order, second order, tertiary or third order, and there we make confusion. So primary consumers are called as herbivorous or also called as first order consumers. They are the animals, okay? They are the animals which feed on the producers. That means they are the animals which feed on the plants. Now this can be an insect or this can be a proper animal as shown in the picture. So it can be an insect, it can be something related to caterpillars, or maybe it can be something related to cattle, cows, goat, deers, rabbits, etc. So you can go from a smaller range to a wider range also. But have a basic idea that primary consumers only consume plants, that is herbivorous. The second important concept, that is called as a secondary consumers. They will be also called as second order consumers, or they will be called as primary carnivores. Okay, so this concept should be very clear. Why are they called as primary carnivores? So if you see the earlier picture, you can find over here that the organisms are totally dependent on the plants for their survival or food material. On another hand, when we are talking something about the secondary consumer, we can see that the animals or the birds, or in short the organism, is dependent on the primary consumer. Okay, that means herbivorous पे वो depend होते हैं, वो प्रोड्यूसर्स पे डिपेंड नहीं होते हैं, इसीलिए उन्हें कार्निवोरस कहा जाता है. सो कार्निवोरस का मतलब ही होता है द ऑर्गेनिज्म विच सर्वाइव ऑन द फ्लैश ऑफ एन अनदर ऑर्गेनिज्म, दैट इज कॉल्ड एज कार्निवोरस. So these are called as primary consumers. Reason is because they depend on very small organisms for their food. For example, you can say that the snake will feed on a frog, and of course we know the frog is one kind of organism which is having a dual nature. So we can't say that the frog is purely an herbivorous. Of course the frogs can also sometimes in some parts of region can feed on the insects also. For example, maybe the caterpillars or maybe the grasshoppers, etc. But one should keep in mind that example for it can be like cat. So cat will feed on the rat. Okay, so this rat is basically feeding itself or depending for the food on the producer, that means grains, or maybe for example if it is a rat of desert region, so it will be depending on particular kind of vegetation grown over there, but this cat will depend on the rat for it. So the secondary consumer is also called as the primary carnivorous because they have the dependency for the food on flesh of primary consumers. Henceforth primary word add किया गया है. The next concept is called as the tertiary consumers, and you can see now we are increasing step by step. Like I said, that energy will pass step by step. It will not pass instantly. It is one of the process which takes time. So even though we feel that it does not take time and it is a very instant process, the fact is that this food chain or food web is not that instant process to understand, because it is one of the concept, it is one of the cycle which needs to be followed so that ecosystem is maintained. If you want to maintain this ecosystem, one needs to follow this consumption of energy cycle also. So when we talk something about the tertiary consumers have the very idea that they are called as third order consumers. Now what do you mean by third order consumers? That means kind of organisms, maybe it can be an animal or it can be a bird, they depend on the primary carnivores. Okay, so we have seen something like primary carnivores like cat, fox and snake. Now what we are going to see is in tertiary that these animals or birds depend completely on the primary carnivores or secondary consumers. Okay, for example, let's make it simple, like the birds of eagle or vultures, they completely feed themselves on the products or flesh of the animals like that of the other animals. For example, they will feed themselves on frogs, or for that case the animal like bird like eagle will feed itself on the snake. So you can see over here that the snake will have the food dependency, or it will have the food idea on the basis of, that means they will feed themselves, they will require the food which is obtained from the frog, and now this frog will be eaten by snake. This snake is the secondary consumer or primary carnivorous animal, and this snake will be taken in as a food by the eagle or that kind of bird which is in carnivorous nature. And hence this product, that means this food chain, will continue till the end. Of course there will be a decrease in the energy. So you can find over here the animals which depend on, for example, wolves or eagles or owls, vultures, which depend on another living organism which have been feeding on the flesh of another material, will be called as a tertiary consumer. Let's see the last part is of this conversation, that is quaternary consumers. Now the quaternary consumers becomes very easy because it is one of the end part of your consumers, and henceforth they are called as consumer, or rather you can call it as very simple word that is called as omnivorous. They are the largest consumers and hence no other organism will feed on this organism, okay, unless and until they die. So for example, lion and tiger will feed on any kind of other, that means by the process of food generation or cycle, they will feed on the another organism. Maybe they will feed on any kind of organism which is herbivorous, or they will feed on any kind of organism which is carnivorous. But this organism will be in itself and they will have the ability to last themselves unless and until they die. So जब तक ये organism मर नहीं जाता, for example lion, tiger, bears, wolves, etc., they will not be consumed by any other kind of organism, and henceforth they are on the largest part, or they are called on the top level of the consumer series. And they are one of the major component because they maintain the ecosystem, and ecosystem maintain करना बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी हो जाता है with the help of consumers. Now let's understand, when we are calling something about with the help of consumers, that means when we are talking something about and cycle which needs to be completed, because where a start is there you should have an end to it. For example, like I said, the lions and tigers will not be consumed by any other kind of organism. But then what happens to these organisms when they die? Of course, they will be in a form of material which is to be passed back to the earth, and this is done by one of the important area of our biotic system, that is called as decomposers. So decomposers henceforth is also called as reducers because they break down the material which is in a form of a complex product. For example, whatever the animals, maybe a primary consumer, producer, herbivorous, secondary consumers, quaternary consumers, when they die, and maybe it is a natural process or unnatural process, these bodies have to be decomposed, and this decomposition takes place with the help of the organism called as decomposers. Now this can be something like visible to eyes, or this can be something which is invisible to eyes, that means they may be a microscopic in nature also. For example, the organisms like the earthworm or dung beetle are visible to eyes. So that is one of the component of decomposers. They break down the complex material of food chain, that is carbohydrate and protein, which is present in the cells of the organism, into fine particles of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, protein, phosphorus, sulfurs, etc., etc. So they break down, and this breaking down helps the earth component, that means the soil, to again regain the nutrient back. Henceforth they have an important role in our food chain. They can also be something of microscopic in nature, for example bacteria and fungi for that case, and henceforth they are also called as saprotrophs. Reason is because they consume all the rotten material, degraded material, and they feed themselves on this rotten and degraded material, and the energy is consumed and the remaining complex material is broken down and passed on to the soil system, so that the cycle of the food chain is maintained. This process is nothing else but also called as a recycling process. So it helps, that means decomposers basically helps in recycling and functioning of the body material or the component material which is in complex form. And henceforth decomposers can also be one of, rather it is one of the important component of the ecosystem. Reason is because you have to start from the cycle of photosynthesis, but then the nutrient which is being captured by the plant and animal, again you have to return back to the soil, and this returning back of the component is done basically by the decomposers. So basically this is again being harvested with the help of the sunlight and water. Now again the food chain starts. That means the again process of starting of photosynthesis starts because the decomposers have given back the nutrient material. Of course, this is in the reduced form. That means, like we have seen, the 10% is only occupied or used. This is in reduced form, but we find that decomposers try to break down all the complex material which is present in the cells of an organism in the form of a dead body. So that is the process of decomposition, and this again return backs to the ecosystem as it is. So the process again starts, and this is called as a cycling process or the cyclic food chain of the ecosystem. I hope you people have understood this concept of biotic consumption with the help of abiotic component, because we have seen how the abiotic component are again then transferred from cell to cell, and with this cell transfer they are again back passed on to the soil. So we find here from these lectures that biotic and abiotic component have a major role when we look forward for the ecosystem. So one cannot survive all alone. Even the biotic system cannot survive, and even the abiotic system cannot survive. So they all are interdependent on each other. Similarly, in today's lecture we have seen how the organism, let it be from primary consumer to secondary to tertiary to quaternary and to decomposers, they all are dependent on each other. If there is no primary consumer, there will be no secondary consumer, or there will be a lack of secondary consumer, and of course this chain will follow, and finally the existence of living organism will be upgraded to nothing. So till we meet for the next lecture, I hope you people will study hard. Till then, take care.